So while I was writing my review for Across the Spider-Verse, which is still in production for this channel, which I've already seen twice at this point, I got an email from Warner Brothers inviting me to an exclusive screening premiere of The Flash, which, by the way, thank you so much, Warner Brothers, for the invite. But more importantly, I was really excited for this movie. I had been waiting for a Flash movie for so long. I'm a big fan of the character, and I have followed his animated journey and to his live-action adaptation with timid surprise, because look, I'm not the biggest fan of Ezra Miller, but I am a very big fan of Flash. So going into this, I had a lot of high expectations. The reviews have been pretty cool. And what did I think of the movie? Well, this movie is not great. This movie really just didn't land the punches. Now, I won't be giving away any spoilers in this because the movie doesn't come out for another week or so, but I do want to talk about just kind of maybe the general things going into this that I was expecting, but more importantly, didn't really stick the landing. So if you like that kind of stuff, or you're just excited for what The Flash could bring, let me know in the comments down below, and also what you're most looking forward to for this movie. All right, so going in, right, you have to have kind of an understanding of where this Flash is coming from. Granted, this is the last real movie before the new iteration of DCEU kicks off, which has a lot of promise on its shoulders, but also this movie was hopefully going to set up maybe something to come for the new DCEU, which is actually a video I did a couple of months ago about how the Flash could bring in a new era for DC, how it could close a lot of loose ends and tie up those knots and create a really unique and beautiful ending to this entire story, the last 10 or so tumultuous years of the DCEU that we have currently. And while if you know the Flashpoint story, you're probably going to be pretty aware of what's going on in this movie, the big thing I took away was that this movie just didn't really not only set up anything, but it doesn't justify its own existence. And that's a big problem for me with a lot of media. A lot of media sometimes just don't find a way to prove that they should exist, nor do they bring a lot to the table that makes me think, oh, this was a worthy investment of not only time, but kind of energy from everyone on board, from the screenwriters to the actors to etc. Though the acting is decent and pretty good in this movie from specific people, there just wasn't a lot here in terms of substance from the script. Granted, it's pretty traditional Flash story, and that's the thing I love. I love the Flashpoint comic. I love the animated movie. It's one of my favorites, but this movie just didn't really have enough weight behind it to pull it forward. Now, talking about Ezra Miller's performance, they do a pretty good job. They're able to carry their scenes they're in. I still don't see Ezra Miller as Barry Allen. I never really did. It's not his humor or his quirkiness. I never quite saw them in the role as Barry Allen, but they do a pretty good job with the material they're given here. And granted, in the universe, Barry has two different versions of himself. We know that from the trailers. We know that from the TV spots. That's no spoiler. That's nothing new. And Ezra does a pretty good job playing both versions of Barry Allen, but there just wasn't enough substance for me to really care about why this version of Flashpoint should exist, or why I should be caring really about these two together, other than, oh, this is the Flashpoint story. Not so much about Barry, but more about, yeah, this is just the rehashing of the comic to an extent. Now, Michael Keaton is great as Batman. Look, I've heard a couple of people say that he seems to phone it in. I didn't think so. I thought he was having a lot of fun with the role. The action scenes with Michael Keaton are great. He does a lot of different stuff that we haven't seen Batman or his version really do before that made his action scenes stand out. So that was a really high moment for the film. If you're a Batman fan going into this, you're probably gonna like what Michael Keaton brings to the table. You're probably gonna like this version of his Batman and the iconic imagery, the different ways they use him, and really his incorporation is pretty good. I think he might be the best part of the movie, but of course there is also Sasha Calle. She is fantastic. I hope I said her last name right. She's great as Supergirl, and I hope that she gets to be Supergirl moving forward. She's a pretty young actress, and I think they're still casting for the new movie coming up. She's really good. You feel like she's Supergirl when she comes into the scene. She has a lot of presence. She has a lot of poise. She's very powerful, clearly, and she carries that responsibility of kind of the suit, the mantle, the hope aspect really, really well. Granted, the plot doesn't give her any favors. It doesn't really service her in any real ways, but just as a solo character, both Batman and Supergirl are done really well, and that's credit to the acting chops of both the actors. So that's a highlight for this film. But when it comes to what the film brings to the table, when it comes to what you'd want out of a Flash movie, which I'm a big Flash fan, this film essentially suffers from what most DC films suffer from, which is bad pacing, a lot of weird writing that just kind of feels, not that it's inauthentic or not organic, but more so it's like you've kind of seen this before. You don't really feel like you're getting anything new out of the experience. A really substandard plot. Look, if we're going across the table, this movie kind of just feels like things happen to happen. Like we have to go from one thing to one thing to one thing to one thing. There's not a lot of downtime to kind of weed through the story and really flesh it out. It's just, we do this and then this and then this because we have to. And that substandard plot is rough to kind of go against, because the animated DC Flashpoint movie is really, really good. That's one of the best animated Flash movies, one of the best animated DC movies, and it's a great Flash story. That's what this movie is based on. The plot here just doesn't work. So many times in this film, I found myself kind of realizing like, oh, there's still this threat. There's still Zod coming. There's still this. There's like, oh, I forgot that this is part of the thing. And you've gone through so many different chapters of this movie to where it just kind of stacks up and they don't coalesce into one another. They more of just compound on top of the fact that there's still just this thing, which is Zod, coming in this movie that exists. And it's just the way that it's kind of put together didn't really work for me. Now, it might work for you, but for me, this was just not a good time put together. And it comes down to essentially the movie kind of being boring at times. There were multiple moments where I'm just sitting there realizing, oh, yeah, I'm not having really a great time here. I'm kind of bored with what this movie's doing, because some of the scenes with Barry and some of the scenes with getting to place, like we go from a little bit of build up to, oh, this big event is happening, and then back to a little bit of build up, and you'd think that would work. And sometimes it does, but there were moments where I was just flat out bored. And I didn't think I'd say that with a Flash movie. I don't know if it's just because of Ezra Miller. I don't know if it's just because of the way the story's put together. I think it's a bit of both, and it's not really Ezra's fault. I don't think the script is that great, and they do as much as they can with this script, and he has really good emotional moments, no question. But the script of this movie, you can tell there were multiple rewrites, you can tell there were multiple iterations. It's flat out boring, and it doesn't help that the CGI in this film is awful. Like, it's bad. It's rough. I know there are moments where it looks great. The opening 10 minutes of this film are really good. The CGI is really good. Barry moving through the Speed Force is amazing. The final 10 moments, really compelling, really interesting, really like Flash story you want to see. But throughout this film, other than like the Batman scenes and a few moments with Supergirl, the CGI is some of the worst I've seen from a high-budget film, let alone from DC, from Marvel. Like, this is some of the worst CGI. It looks like a PS3 game come to life. It looks very empty. It looks like a void. It's just barren. Like, the last fight of this movie, the climactic third act, while it has some cool moments in it, it feels like it's on a PlayStation 3 Tekken stage. It is not exciting at all. This movie does not look that good for large sections, and that's really disappointing, because The Flash has such cool imagery and iconography and ideas that you can work through, and I just didn't find myself being able to invest as heavily because I was constantly being pulled out by the really bad CGI, which, look, it can't be overlooked. With the amount of delays this movie went through, this should have been either continue to be delayed till it was polished more, and you pay your visual effects artists to do a better job, and you pay them more because they're already overworked and underpaid, or you can this movie. I think this movie should have been probably deleted. I don't see a reason why it should exist. You can tell this film had multiple rewrites. Scenes happen, like I said, they just kind of happen because they need to, not because it makes progressive sense really in terms of the story, though it does just in terms of 1 + 1 = 2. When it comes to telling that story of the 1 + 1, you don't really get that. Michael Keaton is great, like I said. Supergirl's really good, but that's about it. Like, I really wanted to like this movie. I really wanted to dive in and talk about the lore of Flash and talk about all the things they did right and the high note they could have left for rebirthing DC with whether it was Superman or somebody. And look, there are some really interesting cameos in here. I'm not going to spoil any of them, but there's a couple in here that are very surprising, and they're fun. If you're a DC fan, if you enjoy DC like myself, they're fun to celebrate those kinds of cameos. It's fun to celebrate those moments for sure, but they don't bring anything to the story. They don't bring really anything to kind of save the plot. It's more of like, oh, I'm glad they did that to kind of highlight and cap off 10 years of what has been really mediocre storytelling. But other than that, this movie just didn't really work for me. I have to look at this movie and ask, did it give validity to its own existence? Did it give credence to be here? And the answer is no. The visual effects don't carry it. The story is not great. It felt very sloppy and very empty at times. Like, you have to remember that this movie was rewritten a bunch of times, and you can feel it. There are absolutely moments in this film where you feel it, and there's a couple of moments in this film where it really hits on what makes Flash great. Like, there's been a TV spot that came out where Barry talks to Supergirl about what hope means. That's a really great moment. That's where it feels like this movie was supposed to be going. But at the end of the day, Flashpoint just did not work for me. Now, granted, you could have a completely different experience, and if you do, I want to know what your experience was like, and I want to know if you enjoyed this movie. For me, I just didn't. I went in with pretty high hopes. I was trying to give it a chance throughout, and there were things that worked. There absolutely were. But for the large majority, this movie just fell flat. it didn't look great, and the story was kind of bad. And I feel like this could have been a way better movie, and at the end of the day, it shouldn't exist. So that's my first kind of iteration, reaction, raw review. I saw the movie last night. I just got back from the theater, wrote a little bit about Spider-Man, and then went to sleep. So this is very open and very just honest. I don't really have anything planned for this video. So if you either enjoyed this kind of raw reaction, let me know. I don't want to write a full review for it until it really comes out, because the embargo just lifted and the full movie comes out next week. Thank you again to Warner Brothers for inviting me to an early screening. I really appreciate it, and I loved the experience. It was super cool sitting in the theater with a bunch of Flash fans and really excited about this movie. But yeah, this movie just did not work for me. And if I have to give it a score, I'm gonna say this is like a 4.5 out of 10. I just don't think this was a good film, and it kind of just ends DC on a whimpering note, which is very fitting for the last 10 years of this cinematic universe. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know down in the comments down below. If you like The Flash or excited for this film, let me know as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will have my Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse video coming up either later this week or really early next week, and that one's going to be a little bit more loose, but there's so much to love about that film. I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am to finish that script and record it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope DC is better with the next iteration, and I hope Flash gets a better interpretation as well. I'll see you guys in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.